In the year 1509, a young king named Henry VIII takes England's throne. His court is a theater of silks and steel, music by night, councils by morning, the River Thames glinting under stone arches. The seat of power is spread across Westminster, Greenwich, and the evolving palace at Whitehall. The stakes are stark: an heir to protect the Tudor line, a treaty to anchor England among empires, the laws and prayers that bind a people. Over the next decades, love letters and legal acts will pull the crown from the Pope's orbit. And in the hush between vows and verdicts, 6 marriages will pass under the shadow of a single question: what is a promise worth when it touches both heaven and the crown? The river at Greenwich is soft in the dawn of 1509. Oars splash, slow and even. Within the palace, candles gutter in tall iron stands. The fresh king, not yet 30, walks as if music is threaded into his bones. He hunts, he writes, he sings. He signs documents in a bold hand and asks after the kitchens. He is a man of appetites and a prince raised on the fear that one mistake could invite a rival. On his finger, a ring glints, a patterned band that says, "Duty lives close to skin." In his court, Queen Catherine of Aragon moves with steady grace. She is the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, trained in statecraft and prayer. Once married to Henry's older brother, she now holds the English crown with deliberate dignity. She tucks a rosary into her sleeve and listens to petitions from the poor. Her Spanish ladies bring distant fashions: a fan that opens like a white shell, whispers of voyages that pass through oceans where enslaved people labor under force, worlds far from the Thames yet tethered to these walls by treaties and gold. In private, she is kind and sometimes very tired. She knows too well what it means to keep going after grief. A quiet moment. The Queen in a small chapel, early morning. A bell rings. A candle drips. She prays not for triumph, but for a child to live. Over the years, the court will sew tiny garments, wash tiny cradles, and carry them away again. One child, Mary, survives, bright and stubborn. Henry holds her small hand and teaches her to look at maps, to read Latin, to ride. He loves her, but when he looks at the walls with their painted kings, he feels an itch under his ring. The line must have a son. It is the law of his world, and the fear of his knights. A lady arrives at court with French manners and a narrow book of songs. Anne Boleyn learned in foreign households to watch every movement of a room. Her eyes are quick. Her speech is light, but not careless. She is not perfectly beautiful in the blunt way of portraits, yet people watch her. She carries a little locket on a chain and sometimes presses it, thinking. When she laughs, a few courtiers look away and then look back. She serves Queen Catherine with discipline and a guarded smile. A parchment crosses Henry's desk, a treaty proposal, a church matter, the harvest reports. The crown is a balance of small grains and great storms. In the galleries, nobles compete softly, a bow here, a joke there. The Boleyn family stands near the edges, careful, attentive. Anne's father knows that power is like an ice river, smooth above, dangerous beneath. He encourages a dance between caution and boldness. Anne is not a puppet. Within her, duty and desire talk to each other in long sentences. One afternoon, in a sunlit corridor lined with tapestries of hunters and stags, Henry meets Anne's eyes. It is not the first time, but this time it lingers. He is a king, used to being wanted. She is a woman whose choices have narrow walls. A page approaches with a letter, sealed with red wax, stamped with the Tudor rose. It smells faintly of bees and warm resin. The letter waits in Anne's chamber for hours, unopened. When she breaks the seal at last, she reads carefully, twice. She places it in a wooden box with a small key. If love and ambition can share a room, this is the room. In chapel, the king stands beside his queen and sings. They look like a picture of obedience. Behind them, embroidered angels hold banners. In another wing, a note passes quietly into Anne's hand. A few lines, careful and proper. More letters follow, requests for patience, offers of protection, pleas for signs. She is cautious. She sets conditions in polite phrasing. She will not be one more story of a king's fleeting desire. He must choose between what seems impossible, the vows he has already made, and the promise of a male heir that the realm demands. An attendant of the Queen notices a small shift that is not yet a scandal. Anne's carriage is delayed until the Queen's passes. A gift arrives for a lady of the chamber, without a name. A clerk in the royal wardrobe records that a crimson velvet sleeve has been tailored to unusual measurements. Such details do not cry out. They whisper. The court, however, is trained to hear whispers. At supper, a lute plays. The king tells a story from a hunt. Anne, across the room, laughs at the right moment. Catherine watches Henry and sees what he cannot hide, a hunger like a star that does not rest. She is not passive. She challenges him. In an antechamber that smells of ink and candle smoke, they speak through the night, voices steady and quiet. They both know the stakes. A daughter's future, a kingdom's law, a soul's safety. A ring on a finger presses a soft mark. In the end, Henry turns away from sleep with a decision that is not yet an action. The question is no longer if he will ask for a change, but how he will force the world to accept it. The last moments of the act focus on a simple object, a plain gold ring lying on a folded piece of parchment. The parchment is blank for now. The door shuts. A clock ticks. The air is thick with silence. Somewhere, a bell at dawn begins to ring. The dangerous promise is this, that love may be used to move a crown, and a crown can break what it claims to love. The year turns, and with it the angle of the sun in the palace windows. A small constellation of strange moments appears. A letter arrives late at the Queen's apartments, then leaves unopened. A royal carriage turns suddenly down a side lane, away from a public mass, so the king can speak to a friend. A glove is found under a bench in a gallery, fine leather, delicately stitched, small enough for a narrow hand. The housekeeper notes it and locks it in a drawer. A clerk erases a name in a book and writes another, more neutral, in its place. Officials call such things routine. Servants talk. An imperial ambassador, a man who writes careful reports to a ruler far away, asks questions that are polite but heavy. He learns that Henry has asked learned men whether a marriage to a brother's widow was ever lawful under God. Law meets theology at a table lit by wax candles. In such rooms the air is still. A fly buzzes. A scholar draws lines on the page and cites authorities. If a first marriage was truly made, can a second ever be? If no son is born, it must be a sign from above, some say. Others say God does not play at human politics. The words are large. The truth is smaller. People fear what they cannot fix. Anne is seen less, and then more, and then less again. A lady-in-waiting observes that Anne wears a locket. Inside, perhaps, is a tiny portrait. Or perhaps it is empty, a private joke. A musician learns a new French air and plays it outside a closed door. He is called away and returns later, not sure what he did wrong. He keeps his eyes down. It is safer. The Queen prays longer. She wears black more days than not. She writes to her nephew, the Emperor, with measured lines. She will hold her place. She believes vows made before God are not cloth you can wash and wring out and call clean. Yet she also understands kindness and clarity. She speaks to her household and asks them to remain calm. In her rooms, the smell of oranges and beeswax hangs steady. She writes her name, Catherine the Queen. Meanwhile, the king's most trusted servant, a cardinal in rich crimson, promises to find a path with Rome. He writes letters with a hand that never shakes. He believes in a smooth road made by patience and skill. But patience runs thin in a palace that must plan succession as carefully as any war. The cardinal arranges a court to hear the case. The queen appears, dignified, and kneels. She says, "I was a virgin when I married." She says, "We have been truly married for many years." The king looks at the floor. Judges whisper. The case stalls like a boat stuck in low tide. Anne says little publicly. Privately, she sharpens her resolve. She knows the risk is not only gossip, it is her life, and the lives of any children she might bear. She asks herself whether ambition is a sin, if it is a shield against harm. She is not naive. She has seen women praised and thrown away like exotic flowers gathered for one feast. If she is to enter the king's inner world, it must be as something other than a passing comfort. To do that, she sets her courage like a jewel in a ring, set firm so it cannot fall out. Night after night, the king writes. He writes not like a ruler dictating an order, but like a man who fears that time is sand pouring from a glass. The letters smell of wax, sometimes of rosewater. They cross rooms in the hands of boys who walk in soft shoes. Their mouths are closed tight. They are paid well to be quiet. A seamstress glimpses a line of one letter as she mends a sleeve. "My heart," it says. She pretends she saw nothing. She will take the memory to her grave. One evening, a near discovery. A folded note slips from a book and skids under a chair in the Queen's solar. A young attendant sees it and stoops. The seal bears the king's mark. Her hands hesitate. She returns the note to a steward with shaking fingers. He locks it away, and 2 rooms away, someone exhales. Then, a shock. The king announces in council that the kingdom's law must be made to guard the succession, with or without Rome's help. The room is heavy. Some men nod slowly. Others stare as if at a cliff. A faint tapping begins somewhere, just a clerk's quill, nothing more, and will not stop. Outside, in the winter air, Londoners trade the news like a hot coal, pass it quickly or be burned. Friends become careful, enemies become kind. The Queen's supporters compose letters full of scripture. The King's supporters speak of Parliament and the rights of kings. The center point is still a woman in a locket, who walks the gallery with her head straight, careful not to step on the seam between 2 flagstones. In her chamber, a ring sits on a table. It has not yet been placed on her hand in public. The act is only a rumor, yet the rumor grows legs, and rumors in a palace can run faster than horses. A night heavy with frost. The palace wings glow with low lamps. In an inner room at York Place, soon to be called Whitehall, the king pauses over a table. Before him lies a parchment, plain but dangerous, and beside it the Great Seal. Next to the seal is a narrow gold ring and a folded letter. Around him stand only a few trusted men who have learned not to breathe loudly. Beyond the door, the sound of boots in a corridor. Beyond that, the river whispers against its banks. He takes up the seal. He has written to a new archbishop, a man who will judge the marriage under English authority. He has chosen to set aside the old obedience to Rome in this matter, pleading the rights of the crown and the safety of the realm. He is certain and terrified at once. He presses the seal into the wax. The design sinks into red. Something old cracks like a tiny thread snapping, or perhaps that sound is only in the mind. The seal cools in the winter air. A servant brings sand to blot the ink. The king inhales and exhales, steady. A door opens on silent hinges. Anne steps in, veiled, accompanied by 2 confidants, one of them very young, the other sharp as flint. Her hands are empty. The room smells of wax and wool and the faint metal scent of the Great Seal. Words are spoken that have the weight of oaths, but the softness of prayer. They do not speak of love in the way poets do. They speak of safety and obligation, of the future wrapped in a cradle. The ring, when it slides onto her finger, is almost too tight. She twists it and does not flinch. A witness coughs and looks down. Down the corridor, a page stops at the sound of voices and then moves on. Outside, a guard shifts his weight to his left leg. He has no idea what is changing above his head, and yet his life will be different because of it. A messenger waits in the stables with orders sealed for Canterbury. Another waits for Calais. The paper whisper begins. Appointments, proclamations, gentle notices to those who must be told. It is a storm that pretends to be a drizzle. A mistake, almost. The Great Seal leaves a ghostly second impression on a scrap of parchment that should have been thrown away. A quick-minded clerk sees it and folds the scrap into his sleeve instead of the trash basket. He swallows hard. He knows that his life now has two paths. He chooses the one where he lives. He burns the scrap in a brazier in his room and tells himself he never saw it. His hands smell of smoke and something like honey. The Queen, Catherine, receives a message at dawn. The corridor outside her chamber is very quiet. She reads a letter that speaks with respect and force. She is to move to another house, for her health, for her dignity, while matters are settled. She understands perfectly what the words mean and do not say. She folds the paper with hands that do not shake in public. In private, later, she holds her rosary until the cord bites her fingers. Around her, attendants weep softly. She tells them to be brave and kind. She still signs her name, Catherine the Queen. In London, whispers rise to words. Some say God will punish this act. Others say God has already spoken by denying a son and now offers a path. A few say nothing because they must survive. The Archbishop, tempered by years of study, declares the king's marriage to Catherine not lawful under the laws now recognized in England. Soon after, he declares the new marriage good in the eyes of the realm. The old world does not fall in one day, but a crack runs through it. May 1533, Westminster. Anne is crowned in a ceremony full of noise and color. The crowd is thick, the music is loud, yet beneath the grandeur there is unease. Some shout with joy, some stand with tight mouths. Anne wears a mantle heavy with jewels. On her finger the ring has already left a permanent trace on her skin. In her body, another promise grows. A child who may quiet the arguments of great men and the silent storms of great houses. She is careful when she steps, watching a seam in the floor, a habit she never loses. The act ends not with triumph, but with a hush, as a queue of messengers lines the palace yard with letters for noble houses, for towns, for distant ambassadors. Far away, in Rome, men in white and scarlet robes read papers and write others. A clock strikes. The air feels thinner. The unmoving wax seal on the new laws seems to pulse in the candlelight. The true consequence is not yet clear. But it will be. The child is born in September 1533, a daughter, Elizabeth. The king smiles for the crowds and kisses his newborn's small, velvet soft head. He tells courtiers that princes come where daughters come. He holds her tiny hand and marvels at how she can clasp his finger. But behind the public joy, a shadow lingers. The law asks for a male heir to quiet wars before they are born. The land remembers the civil wars of the last century like old bruises. It wants certainty. The king listens to his counselors by day. By night, he listens to his own fear. Anne, newly queen, is clever and strong. She favors scholars who read the Bible in English and argue for reform. She seeks poor relief for those who knock at the palace gate. She has rivals who smile in her face and cut her behind her back with words that draw no blood but leave deep scars. She is not always careful with her pride. She speaks sharply and regrets it later in the quiet, where her locket warms against her skin. She prays in rooms lit by a single candle, rubbing her ring as if it might soften fate. Another pregnancy ends with loss. The queen does not cry where people can see. In private, she does not restrain herself. A woman who serves her holds her hand and says nothing because words would break the queen in two. The king visits and is kind for a while, and then he grows absent. He hunts more, he eats alone more often. He listens when a soft-spoken minister named Thomas Cromwell explains the wealth the crown could guard if the monasteries were brought under new management. The Queen and Cromwell, once allies in reform, begin to pull in different directions. She speaks for charitable works cast in her own image. He plans a system with numbers and seals. In a palace of agreements sewn with silk, a rip appears. Catherine of Aragon, living quietly in the country, falls ill. A rumor passes through taverns and then halls, a bitter scent in her room, a cloth that felt wrong to the touch. Such tales travel quickly because they make fear simpler. But physicians write guarded notes. Chroniclers argue. We do not know for certain why her health failed when it did. What we know is that the king wears black for a set number of days, and then color returns to the court. A bell tolls in a village near her residence. A bell tolls in London. Mary, her daughter, weeps alone. A law still declares her illegitimate. That law may be changed later. For now, it stands like a cold door. On a January day in 1536, the king suffers a heavy fall at the tilt yard. The details are scattered across reports, some exaggerated, some probably true. What matters is how people believed it changed him. His temper shorter, his patience thinner, his sleep rough. He walks with pain and refuses to be seen limping when he can help it. He holds his leg in his own hands at night and feels old for the first time. He looks at the future and sees less space there. A necklace glitters at a window. It is worn not by the Queen, but by a lady named Jane Seymour. Quiet, careful, with plain manners. She learns quickly the single most important rule in this place: say little and listen much. The king visits her family's rooms, and the household grows very calm, as if no one lives there at all. A folded letter goes from a Seymour brother to Cromwell. We do not know its exact words. We know only that alliances can be woven faster than blankets and feel warmer. Spring turns the gardens green, and then the strange events begin to multiply. The musician who once played in a hallway for Anne is arrested in the night by men in gray. He is questioned. He says things that may be true, or may be said under the weight of fear and the desire to be believed. Another courtier, then another, are accused of inappropriate closeness to the Queen. The official records speak of dates and times and places. Those records exist, but many scholars believe the charges were gathered in haste, the proofs shaped to a purpose. Rumor and record slap each other like a flag in a wind. The Queen is taken to the Tower, not as a condemned woman yet. Officially, she is held while questions are asked. She arrives by boat, the water lapping at its sides. She walks with her head high, and then collapses in tears in her lodging, according to one attendant's note. Another witness says she laughed sometimes, wildly, as if grief had broken its rope. People do not behave one way when the ground falls away beneath them. They behave like humans, uneven, contradictory, alive. A trial is called. Peers sit in heavy robes. The Queen stands alone, a small figure under a high roof. She speaks with clarity. She denies the charges. She asks to be remembered as a faithful wife who failed in only one thing: giving a son. A letter, perhaps, is written to the king. Some chronicle says such a letter exists. In it, Anne speaks of forgiveness and asks for mercy for others. Or perhaps that letter is a later invention, a way for a storyteller to survive the weight of history. We do not know. We say, carefully, it is disputed. Behind the doors, Cromwell's men compare notes, and the king's mind moves like a shutter in a storm. Jane Seymour is kept quietly away from court, and yet a ring is measured for her finger. A specialist is summoned from across the channel for a task nobody names aloud. Paperwork carries phrases like, by the law, that look clean to eyes that do not see their edges. A lady-in-waiting shivers although the room is warm. She is told to stand straight and not to cry. The act ends with a sealed order leaving Whitehall at dusk. A raven sits on a rooftop. The Thames stares back like black glass. We do not speak, in detail, of what those orders brought. We say only that the Queen's fate has been decided, and it will change the crown forever, and it will not bring peace. Morning. A platform. The hush of an assembled crowd that breathes as one creature. A woman steps forward in the light, not dressed as a queen but as a private soul. She speaks plain words about prayer and obedience, keeping her dignity like a cloak around her. She forgives. She asks others to be kind to the king, to keep their tongues from blaming. The air is steady. A brief prayer soft as water. We do not dwell on the moment after. The story moves forward with the quiet decision to live with what has been done. Within days, Jane Seymour wears a ring. The court rearranges itself like furniture after a move. The king meets with ministers and smiles again, tired but lighter. Jane is soft-voiced, trained in the art of being simple. She requests mercy for Mary, the king's daughter by Catherine, and persists until Mary signs a paper she hates, and the door of favor cracks open for her. The law is a hard rectangular thing, but even laws are handled by human hands. They slide, they scrape. The palace rooms where Anne once stood are repainted. Tapestries of saints are rolled and replaced with hunt scenes. A locket is found under a floorboard, the kind a seamstress might have made, cheap and pretty, and no one can agree whose it was. Objects do not tell their stories. They sit and gather dust and dare us to imagine. 1537. Jane Seymour bears a son, Edward. Bells ring across England. Fires are lit on hilltops, answering each other from ridge to ridge like old friends calling. The king holds the small prince and looks suddenly young again, and then older than before. Joy breaks over the palace and runs into its corners. But joy cannot stop a fever or a hidden wound. After the birth, Jane weakens. The rooms smell of clean linen, metal basins, and some say, sharp oils used to ease pain. The queen dies in a flood of prayers and whispers. The king wears deep mourning. He does not threaten his servants for openly crying. He opens his hand to show a woman's ring with no owner, and does not hide his grief. Time lifts its heavy garment and settles it again. Years pass in minutes here. The king remarries to Anne of Cleves, a German princess, after diplomats exchange portraits and promises. She arrives in winter, hears English for the first time in crowded rooms, and tries her best. The marriage is set aside after a short time, not with a sword of words, but with careful agreements and polite phrases. She receives houses and a pension, and the unthreatening title of the king's sister. She becomes, quietly, one of the safest women in England, walking in gardens, learning to laugh at English jokes she does not fully understand, and living long past the man who dismissed her. Then comes Catherine Howard, young and bright, with a laugh that lifts the air. The palace smiles for a season, but she is young in a place that expects the wisdom of age delivered in a girl's step. She is watched by men who weigh people by how useful they are. The past reaches for her in letters, and encounters she cannot erase. The present, sensing blood, makes these shadows into lines on a legal page. We mention no method. We describe no detail. We say only this: her story ends as Anne's did, under the law, on a platform, with the hush of a crowd and the low murmur of prayers. Her death is recorded in careful handwriting. The ink dries. Catherine Parr comes last, a widow twice over, a writer of prayers, a woman of reading and opinion who nonetheless understands when to bend. She marries the king in a room fragrant with herbs, the windows open to let in air. She becomes a stepmother to 3 royal children, whose lives have already strained under the weight of adult choices. She holds a book close, and sometimes debates too sharply for comfort. Men in black gowns prepare papers to question her. She learns of the danger and goes at once to the king, not with argument, but with humility, saying she meant only to ease his mind by talking faith. He accepts her reply, Or perhaps he only pretends to spare public trouble. Either way, the papers are put away. A lesson is written in the invisible ink of survival. The dynasty survives by a thin thread. One small boy, Edward. Behind him stand 2 daughters once pushed aside by axe, and then later pulled closer by different acts. The crown is a river that must pass from head to head. It is also a ring that can leave a deep mark on the skin. In Henry's last winter, the palace is quieter. Doors stay shut longer. Council meetings outlast the light. The king touches his leg and stares at a fire. He looks sometimes at a small portrait of Jane Seymour and asks no one in particular, "Is the boy well?" Voices answer that he is. The king nods, lost in thought. In January 1547, Henry VIII dies. The room is crowded and still. A key turns in a lock. A prayer is whispered. Outside, frost leans hard on the river. Inside, a ring is taken off a heavy finger, and a seal rests on a folded cloth. Bells toll. The men of council think about routes and schedules, about proclamations and what must be said on the steps of public buildings. The women of the household gather the last of his personal items into chests. Somewhere in those rooms, a locket, a glove, a sealed letter, and a ring change hands again, their meanings altered forever. The story pauses, but it does not end. We look back at the motifs. A ring worn long, a letter under bright red wax, a fan that opened like a white shell, a small key turned in a lock. The objects survive. The people at their centers, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, Catherine Parr, leave their breath in the rooms. Each was a person in a system that granted them jewels and took away their safety. Each carried a private world of hope and fear. We say their names with respect. We leave judgment to a God they invoked every day. Years pass. Children become monarchs. Prayers become policy. One day, after another queen dies, Elizabeth I, daughter of Anne Boleyn, servants and officials catalog her private things. There in a little box lies a small ring. Opened, it shows 2 tiny portraits. One is Elizabeth's own face. The other is a woman with a French hood, Anne Boleyn. This object survives. It is real. It tells us something more than words. A daughter kept her mother's likeness against her skin, hidden under jewels, in rooms where speaking that name was once dangerous. The ring today is associated with Chequers, the country residence of prime ministers, and is known to many as the Chequers ring. Other objects speak in their own ways. The love letters from Henry to Anne, 12 of them survive, rest in a Vatican collection, their journey a mystery with competing stories. Did someone gather them from Anne's desk? Were they taken to Rome by an agent who wanted to show the Pope the depth of the king's resolve? We do not know. We can only imagine hands folding and unfolding those pages, reading lines penned in a bold hand that wrote policy by day and pleas by night. That is a fact. The letters exist. The precise path they took is debated. There are legends, too. Some say Catherine of Aragon's heart showed a strange mark at her death, a sign of poison, claimed in whispers and repeated by those who loved her. Others argue as firmly that illness explains everything, and that the talk of treated cloths and bitter resins served only to put shape to grief and anger. We find in records the physician's words, careful, dense, and in letters the grief of ladies and gentlemen who saw events from their corners of the room. We mark the difference between rumor and record, and we admit where the line blurs, because people carry both truth and story in the same breath. Historians still debate what moved the heaviest stones of this tale. Was it Henry's fear of civil war without a male heir? The push for religious reform? The ambitions of families like the Boleyns and Seymours? The intelligence and agency of queens who found their voices and then paid for speaking? Scholars can weigh paper until the scales break. What remains for us is simpler and no less heavy. Love and power can live in the same space, but they do not share it easily. A promise that feels holy in a chapel can feel like a weapon in a council chamber. And a ring that once slid softly onto a finger can leave a deep mark that never fades. We return in the end to a small thing, a red wax seal, pressed once and put away. Long after the candles went out in Henry's palaces, someone, perhaps a clerk, perhaps a collector, broke a seal that had survived in a drawer. The pop of wax giving way is not loud. It is the sound of time saying, "Now." What lay inside the folded paper is not always a confession. Sometimes it is only an order for cloth, a note about musicians, a plan for an afternoon. And yet even those little lines are the threads of a larger fabric. The wax seal, finally broken after a century of silence, lets the past breathe a thin breath into the present. We listen. We do not look away.